All right, good afternoon and happy Wednesday. Um, in a new policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on the African continent, the Secretary General highlights the continent's swift response to the pandemic, but also calls for global solidarity with Africans now and to recover better. In a video message recorded for the launch, the Secretary General said that most African countries have moved rapidly to deepen regional coordination, deploy health workers, and enforce quarantines, lockdowns, and border closures. They're also drawing on the experiences of HIV/AIDS and Ebola to debunk rumors and overcome mistrust of government, security forces, and health workers. But despite these efforts, the pandemic threatens progress achieved on the continent and will aggravate long-standing inequalities. The Secretary General called on the international action to strengthen Africa's health systems, maintain food supplies, avoid a financial crisis, support education, protect jobs, keep households and businesses afloat, as well as cushion the continent against lost income and export earnings. The Secretary General also emphasized that African countries should have quick, equal, and affordable access to any eventual vaccine and treatment. These must be considered global public goods, he said. He added that ending the pandemic in Africa is essential for ending it across the world. The policy brief and the video message have been distributed and shared with you earlier today. On a related note, this morning during the opening session of the Africa Dialogue series, the Secretary General reiterated the solidarity of the United Nations with African countries as they tackle the new coronavirus. He welcomed Africa's support for his call for a global ceasefire, but also warned that the pandemic is affecting capacity to support peace and security efforts across the continent. My message to the international community, he said, is that failure to respond quickly and adequately could jeopardize progress towards silencing the guns by 2020 and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as Africa's 2063 agenda. He said that the empowerment of African youth and repeated that women should play a central role in all peace processes, just as they need to be central to every aspect of the COVID-19 response. These are still the early days of the pandemic in Africa, and disruption could escalate quickly, he concluded, as he renewed his appeal for global solidarity with all African countries. And in a joint statement following the publication of the Secretary General's policy brief on Africa, the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, and the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Solomon Dirso, called for urgent measures to help mitigate the impact of the pandemic. Bachelet and Dirso said that while measures to restrict movements and increase social distancing were essential in the fight against the virus, they were having a dramatic impact on populations, especially those who rely on informal daily work for their survival. They both also underlined the importance of preserving freedom of association, opinion, and expression, as well as access to information during this time. The human rights chief joined the Secretary General's call for equitable access to COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. Meanwhile, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, today launched her report on the new Development Coordination Office in her capacity as chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. The launch was part of the continued virtual operational activities segment of the Economic and Social Council. Ms. Mohammed said that the human crisis caused by the pandemic is a reminder of the need to move faster and farther to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. She added that now is the time for stronger coordination for governments and societies to come together to respond to the devastating impact of the virus and recover better. Ms. Mohammed explained that the report provides an overview of all activities and key results of the wider resident coordinator system. We've shared with you her remarks, and the full report is available on ECOSOC's website. Also, in the spirit of transparency of the Secretary General's agenda for reform, a new online portal went live today to better track the Special Purpose Trust Fund. This is the financial backbone of the new UN coordination system, and now you can see where the money is coming from and to which country it is going. It's available on unsdg.un.org/SPTF. And today, the UN Development Program said that global human development, which is a combined measure of the world's education, health and living standards is set to decline this year for the first time since 1990, when the concept was first developed. The Human Development Office said that the world has seen many crises over the last 30 years, but still development gains continue to grow. Excuse me. However, COVID-19 may change this trend. More information on this is available on UNDP's own website. And the World Food Programme said today COVID-19 may push an additional 10 million of the world's children into acute malnutrition. The UN agency estimates that the number of young children suffering from this life-threatening form of undernutrition could increase by 20% as a result of the pandemic. The World Food Programme is working with governments to monitor populations vulnerable to the virus and adapting nutrition support where it is required. WFP is also working to ensure the production of specialized nutritious foods is not disrupted during the trade restrictions. And back here, Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, briefed the Security Council this morning. He warned that the continuing threat of annexation by Israel of parts of the West Bank would constitute a most serious violation of international law, deal a devastating blow to the two-state solution, close the door to a renewal of negotiations, and threaten efforts to advance regional peace and our broader efforts to maintain international peace and security. He noted announcements by the Palestinian leadership yesterday evening that it will see itself absolved of, quote, all the agreements and understanding with the American and Israeli governments and all of the obligations based on these understandings and agreements, including the security ones. Mr. Mladenov told the council members that whatever our individual assessment of the Palestinian reaction to the Israeli threat of annexation may be, it is certainly one thing. It is a desperate cry for help. It is a call for immediate action. He added that he would be meeting with the Prime Minister of Palestine tomorrow to get more details on their decision. He asked the Security Council to join the Secretary General in his call against unilateral steps that will hinder the current diplomatic efforts to create the conditions for bringing Israelis and Palestinians back to the table. He said that Israel must abandon threats of annexation and the Palestinian leadership must re-engage with all members of the quartet. At 3 p.m. today, Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, will brief the Council in an open session on Venezuela. Turning to South Sudan, UN peacekeepers there are in Pieri in North Jonglei state following reports that many people were killed and injured when intercommunal clashes took place over the weekend. Peacekeepers couldn't verify the numbers of actual casualties due to conflicting reports, but the UN team spoke directly with relatives of those killed, injured, or forced to flee their homes. They also saw many huts having been burned to the ground. The mission says that violence is being fueled by economic deprivation due to devastating floods, which wiped out many homes and killed thousands of cattle. The mission also said those involved in the fighting are emboldened by the government not having appointed local governors. In recent months, to deter intercommunal violence, the mission has brought the warring groups together for reconciliation and peace building. However, COVID-19 related travel restrictions and prevention measures have stalled these talks. Also during the same weekend clashes in Jonglei, a Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders staff member and 2 staff members of another humanitarian organization were killed on the 16th. The humanitarian coordinator for Sudan, Ala Mudehu, strongly condemned the killings, noting that the government, all parties and communities must step up efforts to protect aid workers who are taking great risks for their safety in order to provide much needed assistance to the most vulnerable people in South Sudan. And I have another update on Super Cyclone Amphan, which made landfall in India today along the border with Bangladesh. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that UN teams on the ground continue to work with the government of Bangladesh to prepare and support those in need. Given the current pandemic, this support includes distribution of personal protective equipment, disinfectants, and other materials to evacuation shelters. To reduce the person-to-person contacts during the delivery of aid, e-cash distribution will be used. We, along with our partners, are mobilizing more than 1,700 mobile health teams and preparing for emergency food deliveries. The super cyclone is taking a westerly trajectory towards India, but nearly 8 million people in Bangladesh remain at risk. The Bangladesh government has evacuated more than 1.8 million people in high-risk areas. Returning to Africa and an update on our efforts concerning the current pandemic, in Kenya, the UN Refugee Agency and other aid agencies, as well as the government, are strengthening the COVID-19 response after authorities confirmed that 2 people tested positive for the virus in the Dadaab refugee camp. In Dadaab, isolation and quarantine centers where nearly 1,000 additional beds have been constructed and 125 hand washing stations are being installed at food distribution sites, schools, and markets. UNHCR, the World Food Programme, and their partners have provided double rations of food and hygiene products such as soap and jerry cans to minimize the need for large gatherings and queues. UNHCR's global COVID-19 response plan has so far received 31% of the $745 million needed to assist refugees impacted by the virus. And from our colleagues in Armenia, where there are more than 5,000 confirmed cases of the virus, the UN team there, led by resident coordinator Shambi Sharp, has been supporting the government's plan to address the pandemic. WHO is directly helping the Ministry of Health and providing personal protective equipment, test kits, and other supplies. UN experts are also ensuring that labs, hospitals, and other facilities are prepared to respond to the pandemic. To ensure that education continues, the UN Population Fund and UNICEF have provided computers to the Ministry of Education so that vulnerable children can access distance learning. UNICEF is also working with the government on training teachers and providing guidance. UNDP is helping to retrain young people living in communities where jobs have been lost due to COVID-19 for remote work, while UNHCR is increasing its support for refugees through online language education and psychosocial support. UNHCR and its partners are also distributing cash assistance to refugees and asylum seekers, and the team is also helping with distribution of some 1,600, sending supplies to nearly 1,600 people living alone in remote villages. And today marks World Bee Day. This year, the focus is on good practices adopted by beekeepers to support their livelihoods and deliver quality products. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an undeniable impact on the beekeeping sector, affecting production, the market, and as consequences, the livelihood of beekeepers. Bees and other pollinators, such as butterflies, bats, and hummingbirds, are increasingly under threat from human activity. On her Twitter account, the Deputy Secretary General, Mina Mohammed, reminded that bees are some of our smallest climate action heroes. She added that a wide variety of plants that keep our planet healthy depend on bees, not to mention all of the people who depend on pollination for their livelihoods and honey to make our lives a bit sweeter. Thank you. To mark the day, a virtual event under the theme Be Engaged will be highlighting the importance of traditional knowledge related to beekeeping, use of bee-derived products and services, as well as their importance in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And related to this, I want to flag that on Friday is the International Day of Biological Diversity. This year's theme, Our Solutions Are in Nature. In his message, the Secretary General said that preserving sustainability and managing biodiversity is necessary for mitigating climate disruption, guaranteeing water and food security, and even preventing pandemics. COVID-19, he said, has shown how human health is intimately connected with our relationship to the natural world. That message has been shared with you. Tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m., the Food and Agriculture Organization's Director General, Ku Dong-yu, and the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mark Lowcock, will launch a revised appeal for the desert locust crisis. The event will be broadcast on FAO's website. FAO has revised the initial appeal for $131 million. Has revised its initial appeal, for which $131 million has been pledged to address expanding threats and needs in West Africa and Southwest Asia, in addition to the Greater Horn of Africa. $311 million is now needed to implement locust control for 3.2 million hectares and provide livelihood support for 313,000 households. To answer your question about the revised appeal, Ken Cressman, FAO's Senior Locust Forecasting Officer, will be our guest at the briefing tomorrow. And I will leave it at that, and we will turn to our nice moderator to see if there are questions to be had. James Bays.
Thank you, Steph. Can you hear me okay?
James? Yes, there you go. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Sorry, I can hear you. Go ahead. You were on mute on my end.
Oh, sorry. I thought, yeah. Okay, no. I've got a couple of different questions, if that's okay. Sorry, I had a phone call while you were doing the announcements at the beginning and didn't miss some of it. Tell me if you've already mentioned this, but a foreign UN national dying of COVID-19 in Sana'a, Yemen. Can you tell us any more about that?
No, we understand that that is in fact the case, but I don't have any more details at this point.
Okay. A couple of other questions which are about the way the UN is working now and will go on working. What are the sort of plans to change things in headquarters with a plan eventually to get staff back in here? I noticed, for example, the elevators now have signs on them saying 2 persons only and face masks must be worn. One assumes there's quite a lot of planning work going on about how headquarters would work on the date that it is decided that more people should return here. What is the thinking and what is the discussions going on there?
Well, the thinking is that we're going to have to go to be very careful, base all our decisions on sound medical advice and scientific advice. Currently, the telecommuting, as ordered by the Secretary General, is in place until the end of June. At some point before the end of June, recommendation will be made to the Secretary General as to how to move forward. There is already planning on how a phased return of staff would look like, and that is underway. When that starts is the question. Obviously, it will depend on the global situation and very much depend on the situation in New York City. We also have to look at all sorts of other factors, including childcare, transportation issues. So whenever the return is decided, it will be phased and done very, very carefully.
And one last question, if I can. How is the UN during this telecommuting period using all of its staff? Because one assumes there are some staff who can't be very productive when they're telecommuting. There are all sorts of staff here for the maintenance of the building, and there's clearly not the same level of maintenance required. And secondly, there are all the public-facing staff that deal with all of the public that come through the building. They're the tour guides. Are these people being redeployed, retrained? What are they being used for at this stage after 2 months?
Well, some the maintenance staff continues because the building needs to be maintained. In fact, they're cleaning more than they were in regular time. So the plant needs to be maintained, electricity, and so on. Some of the public-facing staff is working from home and doing press briefings from home. That's what we do. For example, our great tour guides are working on virtual tours, answering questions. There is a program within the Secretary to redeploy staff. So some staff that work in offices that for whatever reason due to the lockdown may not be as busy are helping out other parts of the building, of the administration that has seen its workload increase. So there's a way for us to call on reserve staff if we need more help. And we're trying to make sure that everyone is working, is fully employed and fully busy.
And a final point on this. So it's fair to say no UN staff of any sort have been furloughed. Is that also true of contractors, permanent contractors working for the UN?
That's correct. Of staff, I can't speak for contractors. Obviously, I think we know, unfortunately, the contractors that we see every day who work for catering have been impacted, but other contractors who work for the cleaning staff are continuing to be fully employed, if not more than fully employed. Okay, let's see. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Mladinov, in his speech, said that the quartet should start immediately trying to convene a meeting, and he called on the US, European Union, and Russian Federation to work with the UN, that's his words. Does that mean that the SG will take an initiative to try to resume or to try to contact the quartet or other members of the quartet for an immediate meeting?
Abdelhamid, I think it means exactly what. There's no further meaning than what Mr. Mladenov said in his call on the quartet. So I really think to what he's said. When obviously we have more to announce, we will. Karina and then Edie.
Hi, Stéphane. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Karina.
Hi. Thank you. The Secretary General suggested to the President of the General Assembly switching to a pre-recorded format for messages during the GA. Have you received any response from the President of the GA? And quick follow-up, how would you foresee the work of the press during the upcoming GA? Given all the circumstances, should we expect to cover it from home, or what are the current arrangements?
On your first part, thank you for the question. On your first part, we have not, as far as I'm aware, received response from the President of the General Assembly. Obviously, there will need to be consultations with member states. And also just keep in mind that the next session of the General Assembly will actually be under a different presidency. So, and the elections for the new president of the General Assembly have not taken place. So I don't expect to hear back very in the next few days. But the important thing to stress is that these are decisions that will be taken by member states, and we will be there to support them. As for the work of the press, I think we have to see what the situation is. We very much hope that there will be some reopening of the building by then, which will be a signal that things have improved in New York City, which they are on the right track to do so. So, I think you will cover it in a way that is appropriate for whichever way it is organized. But you're still able at this point to come into your offices. So I don't anticipate any great issue, but we'll obviously be working with you and the Correspondents Association to make it as fun as it always is during the GA. Edie.
Thank you very much, Steph. I also had a follow-up question similar to Abdelhamid's, basically asking whether the Secretary General himself might take the initiative on trying to convene the quartet, given the urgency that Mr. Mladenov said was needed. And I had two other follow-up questions, if you want to take that.
Mr. Mladenov, I think, was very clear in his urgency of the matter and of the situation. At this point, I have nothing I'm able to share with you. Your second question.
Yeah, I was going to ask whether there was any progress on following up on the impact of the Secretary General's call for global ceasefires to all conflicts, and also whether you've checked and whether there's any possibility that we're going to get to ask some questions to him next week.
We're working on the second part of your question. I think there will be a briefing by a senior political affairs official, I think tomorrow, at which the issue of the ceasefire will be discussed. I think Richard Roth had a question which he's too shy to say to speak for himself, so I will read it out. I will read it out for him. And the question was, what is the Secretary General's reaction to the USAID administration letter demanding that the UN stop promoting abortion in its pandemic response? What I can say is that we have indeed received a letter from the acting administrator of the USAID sent to the Secretary General earlier this week. It's been received, and we will respond to it. In the meantime, I do want to clarify that any suggestion that we are using the COVID-19 pandemic response as an opportunity to promote abortion is not correct. While we support healthcare that prevents millions of women from dying during pregnancy and childbirth and protects people from sexually transmitted infections, including HIV, we do not seek to override any national laws. A written question from Iftar. Does the UN plan to replicate the gesture made by its Cabo Verde country team members in other coronavirus-hit developing countries as the world body leads the fight against the virus? I think Iftikhar was referring to the voluntary contributions from salary and others in the Cabo Verde office. I know our colleagues in Kazakhstan have also donated goods. And in fact, our staff here in New York are working with the city of New York to send donations and to support the community. It is obviously up to staff worldwide, but I think UN staff, wherever they are very cognizant of the need to support the local communities in which they work. Toby and then Alan. Toby?
Hi, Steph. Thanks very much. Hope you're well today. Question on, are any UN offices or field teams making any sort of preparations that you're aware of, provided the annexation discussed today at the Security Council moves forward? Are there any plans being discussed or preparations?
Well, let me put it this way. I think all the comments regarding the threat of annexation by Israeli authorities have been very public, so we are very well aware of them, and I will leave it at that. Alan.
Thank you, Stéphane. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I have a follow-up on the Middle East Quartet question. The diplomatic source told to our agency today that such a meeting could be held even this week. Do you have any signs of such a situation? Do you have any signs that such a meeting could be really held tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? And is the SG directly engaged in some kind of negotiations regarding the preparation of such a meeting? Thank you.
Mr. Mladenov is our representative, is at the envoy level, leads our efforts. I think he was pretty clear in his message calling on the US, the Russian Federation, the European Union to work with him and others to come forward with proposals that would enable the quartet to take up its mediation role and work jointly with countries to advance the prospect of peace. At this point, I have nothing I'm able to share with you on a possible date for a quartet meeting. Okay, Abdelhamid, another question.
Thank you again. You know how much I pay attention to the language when Mladenov gives a speech.
I've noticed.
Yes, today the British ambassador mentioned the name of the boy killed. He said his name is Zaid Qaisiya and his age is 15 and he was shot in the head by the Israelis. Mr. Mladenov mentioned, he said that a teenager was killed in Fawar neighborhood near Hebron. Fawar, I don't know if he said refugee camp or not, but he said Fawar near Hebron. A teenager was killed. So which portrays the accuracy of the incident, the British statement or Mr. Mladenov?
I can't speak to the British statement. I know Mr. Mladenov had addressed the killing of the young man, I think in a tweet or in a statement earlier in the week. I think the framing of how this case is mentioned is in no way does in no way show any less caring for the loss of life in this ongoing conflict. All right, Iftikhar, you're welcome. Iftikhar had another question. While welcoming the agreement between Afghan leaders on forming an inclusive government, the UN has been calling the government talent to begin peace dialogue. Is the UN in contact with both parties? Our team on the ground continues to be in contact with all relevant parties in Afghanistan. Okay, Florencia, do we wrap this up? Let's see. Yep, that's it. Okay. Have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow. Why not? Goodbye.